So today we're going to be talking about transformations of the rational parent function. A rational is another word for a fraction. Okay, so you guys see we have a fraction here. The difference with the fractions we're dealing with is that it's not just a number, we actually have variables. We have variables. We might have polynomials, right? So this is what we're dealing with this unit, rational functions. Rationals look like fractions. This is what the parent graph looks like. You'll have two parts. Okay, so let's go ahead and discuss some of the attributes, some of the characteristics. So let's talk about the vertical asymptote. Do you guys see where the vertical asymptote is? Yep, it's at 0. Go ahead and draw the vertical asymptote. That is the vertical line that both sides get very close to, but don't actually touch. So your vertical asymptote went through the x-axis. It went through the x-axis at 0. So the vertical asymptote is x equals 0. Now we're going to draw the horizontal asymptote. This is the horizontal asymptote. I pass through the y-axis right here at 0. So the horizontal asymptote is y equals 0. Will I have an x-intercept? No, because I have an asymptote here. So it will never touch this line. So I'm going to put none. There are no x-intercepts. Is there a y-intercept? Nope, because there's an asymptote there. So none. Remember, guys, the definition of an asymptote is basically a line you never touch. So that means there's no points on the asymptote. That's what an asymptote is, okay? All right, let's talk about the domain and the range. So looking at our graph here, domain is always starting on the left side. So domain is always left to right. Please write that down. We're going to go left to right for the domain. Okay, so let's ignore this one. I'm just going to look at the left side. On the left, it's going forever this way. So what direction is that towards? Yes, negative infinity. And let's follow the graph. It stops here. Where's that? 0. So I'm going to put 0. And we're going to put the union symbol. Let's focus on the other side now. Let's focus on this side. Where is this part starting? At 0. And it goes off to the right, infinity. So that is your domain. Okay, now let's talk about the range. Whenever we do the range, you go from the bottom to the top. I see many students trying to start at the top. We always start on the bottom, least to greatest, smallest first. So here's the bottom. I'm not going to pay attention to that one. Let's just look at the bottom one. It's pointing down, so that's negative infinity. And the very top of this one, where is that? 0. Union, let's do the other graph now. The other part of the graph. Here's the bottom. Where is that at? 0. And then it goes up from there. That's infinity. So that is how you do domain and range. Okay, now we're going to talk about transformations. And this part is a review. What do you think this plus D will do? Yes, it will go up if it's a positive, or it will go down if it's a minus a number. The C value, that's horizontal movement, okay? So if it's going to the right, that means you have a minus sign. And if it's going to the left, you'll have a plus sign. Okay, that part is review here. Okay, before we move on to the example, I just want to emphasize a point. Our asymptote is always at 0, 0 before you have any transformation. This is the basic graph. where this is what your asymptote looks like. It makes a T. Okay? Let's look at our example here. Let's write out the transformations. What does this plus 3 do? Good. It goes to the left 3, and this minus 4, down 4. Exactly. So guys, remember, normally, before you do any type of transformations, this is what your asymptote looks like. It just goes through 0, 0. However, we just said it went left 3. So now I'm going to be left 3 and down 4. That's right here. So now my T will be left 3, down 4. Your center moved left 3, down 4. That's your new center. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. So this is where we are now. Okay, we went left 3, down 4. Okay, and your graph will just look the same. It'll always look like this. A curve up here and a curve in the third quadrant. Okay, now let's talk about our transformations. This vertical asymptote, where is it? Yep, it's at -3 because we went to the left 3. So this vertical asymptote is at x equals -3. Okay, let's look at this horizontal one. Where is that? -4 because it went down 4. So that's y equals -4. Okay, let's talk about domain and range. So I'm going to use a red pen to talk about it. Let's look at this part first. I'm going to ignore that. This is going to the left. So your domain is -infinity to what's right here? -3. So -3 will go here. And let's look at the next part of the graph. And I hope you guys are starting to notice a pattern when we do this. Here's the left side of the top one. Where is that at? -3. And then it goes off to the right. So infinity. The pattern that you guys need to notice is that your vertical asymptote, x equals -3, will always be this number for your domain. Those numbers will always match. It also matches your left 3. Those numbers match. These numbers match. Okay? All right, so now for your range. Here's the very bottom. That's at -infinity. And then here's the top right here. Here's the top. That's at -4. And we'll do the next one. We're looking at this graph here. The very bottom is also at -4. And then it shoots up to infinity. So that is the range. And let me highlight what matches. This always matches. Those numbers match. Okay, let's talk about the transformations here. Can y'all tell them what's the negative one? Yes, it's going to reflect over the x-axis. That's what the negative in the front does. What about this -2? Good, right 2. And this +1, up 1. Perfect. All right, so let's talk about the asymptote. I went left, oh no, sorry, I went to the right 2 and up 1. So my asymptote, the center will be right here. Right 2, up 1. So my center is now here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my T. This is one asymptote. This is the other asymptote. Okay. So guys, let's answer some questions real quick. My vertical asymptote, it's this one right here. Where is it? Yep, x equals 2. It's crossing the x-axis at 2. Okay, my horizontal asymptote, I went through the y-axis where? 1. There we go. Now, guys, remember, there's always a pattern, isn't there? Negative infinity to 2. 2 to infinity. Negative infinity to 1. 1 to infinity. Now, I'll explain it, but I just want y'all to notice the pattern. It's the same numbers every time. Okay, so guys, let's go ahead and graph this. Now, this is going to look different because look, we said it reflected over the x-axis. Please don't draw this. Don't copy me. Normally, like we did in previous examples, like we did in these examples, your graph looks like this, right? However, we're reflecting across the x-axis. So now it's going to look like this. This one down here will hop over the x-axis and be like that. This one that was up here will now be down here. Okay, so they basically switch sides. This is what your graph will look like. So go ahead and draw that. Your graph looks like this. It reflected across the x-axis. Okay. Now, just so that you understand how we do domain and range, I'm going to scribble out the one right here. We're going to focus on the left. Because remember, domain is left first and then to the right. So let's look at the left side. It's pointing to negative infinity. That's why I have negative infinity there. And it goes to 2. That's why I have a 2 there. Okay, now I'm going to focus on the other side. This one starts at 2, which is why I have a 2, and it goes off to infinity. That's why I have the infinity. Okay? Range, we start on the bottom. It's pointing to negative infinity. That's why I have that. The top of this one is at 1. That's why I have the 1. And then the bottom of this one is also at 1. And then it goes up to infinity. That's how you do domain and range. Okay, so guys, that is the end of the notes. I just want to show you one that I feel like you might get confused on. Go ahead and flip over to the practice. You guys have one that looks like this. I believe number 3. Y'all's number 3 looks like this. Y equals negative 1 over x plus 3. What does the negative do? Yes, so the negative makes this a reflection. It'll reflect over the x-axis. Did it move left or right? No, but it did go up 3. So guys, that means your asymptote is here. It didn't move left or right, it just went up 3. So this is where your t will be. Okay? And since it reflected, it'll be on this side. Your graph will be on these quadrants, 2 and 4. Okay, so that's how you look at number 3. I didn't want you guys to get confused since there's no number here. It didn't move left or right. So all you do is go up 3. All right, that's the end.